Welcome, gorgeous creatures, to this week's episode of Embodied. I am joined by a phenomenal artist in our midst. I had the privilege, unbridled really, of connecting with all of the speakers at last month's TED Talks Richmond. And one of the figures that was there sharing his story of creativity, of self-development, of coming face to face with the public on rather a grand scale was internationally acclaimed artist Simon Kenny. Simon has really sweetly and generously agreed to come on and share a little bit of his magic with us ahead of his next big exhibition, which happens in April. So Simon, thank you so much for being here. I love that I have you all to myself.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So I guess the first thing I'd love to just touch on, because TED Talk for you was a bit of a departure. You mentioned to me in our kind of private green room area that showing up for podcasts, showing up for exhibitions, showing up behind your art, talking about your art is by now a well-practiced skill, even if it wasn't authentic for you to begin with. But that actually sharing what you did at TED, which was the intimate journey for you in your life and how you got to this place in your career, that is somewhat more of an exposing opportunity.
Yeah, very much so.
Tell us a little bit about what that experience was like.
Funnily enough, I kind of developed confidence in how I presented and my vision of self, and obviously then being exposed to a wider audience and having a 15-minute space where I need to just talk about me and the journey into art and all of those things. Very sort of a much more personal experience. Yeah, it was a real challenge. It really was to just allow sort of authenticity to speak with confidence, about it. It really made me question as to why I worried so much about it. And actually, really, it's something that I've wanted to when I talk in exhibitions and when I'm talking to clients, I want to be as genuine as possible. I can't understand why I had so much fear about talking about it in such a grand space with so many people watching. All of those doubts and the like performance, and I didn't want it to feel like a performance. I wanted to really drive into it feeling authentic, and it was actually a lot more challenging than I expected. I don't think I felt anxiety like it. I can't even think the last time I was that nervous,
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because if I think back to the speech that you shared, which hopefully should be up for anyone that wasn't able to be with us at the live event, TED releases these digitally within a couple of months. So we should be able to get access to those and put them into the show notes. But, the thing that really struck me about your writing was, it was exquisite. You have such a pen to you, which it's lovely to see that the artistry in the visual realm has kind of carried over. But what you were sharing fundamentally was very intimate. The story that you described was your trajectory from young boy through to now a phenomenally well-known creator. And I think part of what something like TED can expose people to is you're in front of giant lights and huge cameras, and TED has acquired such an intellectual caliber and public image, and then you're there essentially handing over your opus, but you're still in front of the guest, you're still in front of the audience, rather than I put my canvas in front of you and I leave it there for you to make your own decisions, your own judgments, to make your own meanings from it. Instead, it's me describing my trajectory from a small one. And I think it's sort of inevitable that would bring up, the kind of, am I really allowed to be here? Is my story enough?
Absolutely. I think sat amongst, of my own life, my own sort of, the kind of trajectory that I've been on, my own arc, in a way, fell outside of how I didn't see myself as almost bringing the same value in a lot of ways as to what maybe some, very educated people in the talk taking part of it, the speakers. I thought maybe I started to question my own value, and it's funny really that I went down that road with it initially. That a lot of self-doubt and imposter syndrome and all that stuff was kind of happening unexpectedly. Because when I was writing it away from an audience, I could be really authentic and really genuine and feel that I didn't see barriers, you know. And of course, then when I was on the stage itself became it just this level of exposure that, I kind of, it's sort of like a sense of nakedness that you kind of was, it was overwhelming, but I kind of, but also incredibly rewarding because there's nowhere left to hide really. You kind of, that's it. You are doing it. You're in that very moment. The experience of it is incredibly enriching, even if it's masked with terrible anxiety and all these other things that are going on. But just to be there and be present with it, and it is my story, right? It is. It's coming from a place of absolute authenticity. Just sort of, and it's huge for me. It was a big milestone. But yeah, the canvas has for a very long time been something that, in a way, it's a way that I articulate my feelings and emotions. But I know just in the nature of what I'm painting and how I paint it, obviously, the majority of viewers don't know what's really happening. Really, they're not seeing inside Simon Kenny. They're seeing this moment that has arrived and that we share, but there's a story behind what leads to that. And I've managed to sort of, in some way, guard that from the world in a lot of ways. To keep it sort of wrapped under a blanket, and it's given me security in a way, but it becomes a bit of a cage too.
I relate to what you're sharing so much. For those that don't know this, my first life was as an art historian and then a curator and then gallery girl and, all of the really glamorous rungs that you walk up as you gaze at other people's art. And I remember finding it really strange that the artist wasn't the person that wrote the curatorial script that you would see on the wall. That to me was in and of itself bizarre, that you had something that was so clearly personal that then was filtered through an expert's lens, that then was put on the wall minimally for the viewer to then decide, what is it that I make of this piece? And in some ways that's stunning because it's inspiring in all of the people that see a piece of art, their own creative experience. And arguably that's more of what we need. But on the reverse, you become so distant from this thing and that kind of aura.
Yeah, completely. But I took a huge amount of comfort in that too, because it kind of, when I paint, I'm striving to be in the moment, to be really present. But when I then present the work, I'm removed from it. There's a barrier of comfort that, and TED was the dropping of that barrier, really. It was finally, I'm stepping through it or over it, and kind of, into a new light that I had resisted being into for fear of failure and fear of all these other things that come with, a life lived and all of your own insecurities and all those things. But yeah,
It's so interesting, this thing about, is it going to be good enough? Because you were asked to be a part of TED. I mean, you were approached and you decided to do it as an act of clearly self courage, but also in some ways as an act of service. That was the call on you in that moment. And I remember being told a couple of years ago that we never become good enough. It's not about getting to an external standard that's uniformly verifiable. We make a decision that we are, or this work is good enough for us, and it's a daily commitment. From an energetic perspective, I would say that the people that make that decision, they're not inflating themselves or saying they're better than others, but if they've decided that they are enough for them, the energy of that carries in such a deep, palpable way that almost ends up cultivating that way of being received by another person. I wonder for you, what's your wider experience been with building enoughness or building confidence? Because it sounded from your story like your early years did not include a huge amount of that experience.
No, it's been very much practice and process, really. In my journey into art in itself was because I bucked the trends of education. I fought against all of it, really. The more that educators or role models try to put me into a box, the more I kind of fought against it. But that in itself created this sort of dynamic for me that left me with a lot of doubt because I didn't feel like I had the skills to warrant kind of making a career or gaining any success really. I just kind of I saw my art solely as a hobby for many years. I didn't see it as anything else other than that. I was because I didn't think I'd earned it in a way. And of course, what I was missing was the fact that actually practice and learning process is being an artist. Right? It was kind of I shied away from it for so long, and then yeah, I think as when I was picked up by galleries and I started to kind of walk through doors in that sense, there was a huge amount of imposter syndrome initially. The first exhibitions, I was actively trying to sabotage me going to them. Yeah, I was genuinely kind of the idea of being in front of a crowd of people that would ask me questions, and I hadn't, I struggled to understand at the time that actually I was an artist, right? I was practicing, but I didn't see myself as those things. I felt like I hadn't earned it in a way that I had the right to be stood there in front of people, receiving praise for my work and those sort of things. Yeah, it was a tough journey actually I kind of actually found my confidence initially in sort of receiving feedback from all sorts, galleries and collectors, and I started to believe I can actually do it. Right? I thought I can do this. People are interested in what I'm saying, how what I'm creating. It took a while, and then gradually I started to realize I've been doing this my whole life. My whole life I've been doing this. The story that I was telling, I was viewing it through a very narrow lens of a professional artist. I kind of actually thought I'd only really arrived at the moment when I was picked up by a gallery or I'd got my first collectors or those sort of milestones kind of, they were the first things that surfaced for me a sense of confidence. But actually, over time, I was like, I've been doing this my whole life since I could very first hold a crayon. The path that I've been on has been there for, of course, then all of a sudden I was like, no, I've got this, right? I've kind of, it just, because I know I've switched styles and I've practiced with nearly every material I can lay my hands on, and I've experimented and experimented and experimented and destroyed and remade, and I think actually that is being an artist. It took a while for me to really realise I was almost frustrated by the fact that it took me that long to believe that I was doing it. Kind of to
But that makes sense because you were doing this thing that was beautifully private, and then you started to get visibility and you started to get acclaim, and there are these people outside of you offering you accolades and compliments that most of us never receive. The idea of someone coming up to you in the middle of the street and showering you with praise, as much as I would love if we lived in a world like that, we don't. And so actually, because most people are walking around with a quality of sort of, I'm not sure I belong, I'm not sure that I'm good enough, they're slightly suspicious of the way they'll be received by other people. I think it can be really disconcerting to suddenly receive so much glow that feels overly inflated relative to what it is that we've created. Because for us, and I know this is the case for you, it's very natural. I know that there's a huge tussle in the creative process, and especially for you. But I also know that this is something that flows out of you automatically. And I think perhaps as a culture, we've kind of lost the validation of natural born talent. Like you say, we feel like we have to have put in the reps to deserve it, and you have. But equally, even if you hadn't and you just arrived on day dot with a tiny paintbrush, being able to create these magical things, that would be just as valuable.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I kind of, again, I had this firm belief that it needed to be earned in some way through years of education and kind of, some sort of formulaic practice that I hadn't gone through. I hadn't followed any of those. I bucked all the trends and I intentionally went against the grain.
Did you find, Simon, when you first started, was it just as though you had to create? Was it that urge when you were young that it just wasn't stoppable.
It was very, very strong. I remember holding crayons when I was young, and it was a constant need to be sat with paper. Like anywhere I'd go, I'd want a bit of paper. We were sat at someone's house, we go to visit friends or family. I'd want paper and to sketch and doodle and do something. I'd be colouring something in. I was just that. I was always in it in some way, shape, or form, and it took many forms. It wasn't just drawing or sketching. I was making things with my hands. I was the kid building tree houses, and then they were becoming these sort of sculptural things that I was just, my hands just became this way of transforming things into something else. And I became kind of obsessed with the practice of making stuff, just, it didn't really matter what it was. I was interested in chemistry, combining things and the reactions of stuff. There was something visual that fed me in a way that gave me a hunger to explore more. The more that I did, the more that I wanted to do. It just kind of led and led and led. And with the art, it carried with me. And when I left all of the, usually you grow up, you're not going to be making tree houses for most of your life. You leave those things behind, and art was always the thing that was with me. It was always being drawing and sketching and painting and pastels and charcoals. And I remember being sat in pubs with my friends, and I'd have a sketch pad with me, and I'd just be like drawing people playing at a pool table, or I'd be kind of, I just wanted to record moments all the time. It just became a thing for me that I was kind of obsessed about. And it was often the mundane, just life happening in general that no one pays attention to, that I was kind of became an observer of. And the more that I became an observer, the more that you see, and that, it just fed and fed and fed. Yeah. And it's been with me. It's literally like a second skin, I kind of genuinely.
I was just thinking as you were talking about, so you were giving this impression that there's absolutely a zest and a hunger, and then there's the kind of reflective quality of finding quiet moments to witness the world. I've always been like that. So I can feel your mind and I can feel your spirit getting really captivated by this practice. But I also wonder about art, and control is the wrong word, but for someone that's young and that is living in a context that can be chaotic, to have something material in your hands that you can manipulate and make into something else, I feel like there is automatically in that something about seizing life in your own agency rather than feeling swayed by the world around.
Absolutely. I don't think I was necessarily aware of it to begin with, but I think as time went on, probably when I was maybe a very early teens, maybe slightly before then, I started to really view art as a form of escapism. And it was an environment that in a lot of ways I could control. I could create a world that I wanted. I could draw subjects that I liked. It was through my lens and not through anyone else's in a lot of ways. So that kind of almost obsession with it kind of grew. And actually, as sort of my own trauma kind of developed in that, my need to kind of escape into art again and to kind of control my narrative rather than the world I was living in, kind of feeling like it was, there was a real sort of moment. I was probably about 11 or 12 when, I kind of, my compositions turned darker, and I was kind of, creating all monsters and all these sort of things that were kind of reflecting what was going on in my life at the time. But I was kind of profoundly aware that this was the one place that no one could kind of get to me. This was where it was mine solely, and everything else was crazy around me, and life was, there was just turmoil at home, and it was really, really quite extreme. But it was like an escape pod. I could kind of get into it on a bit of paper for an hour, 2 hours. I could completely lose myself in this piece. And I just felt like I was just detached in some way from everything else that was going on. It would be everything for a few hours. and then I'd step away from it, and kind of the moment would sort of live there. It would live in my sketchbooks or in my portfolio or whatever. But then, of course, as I look back over time, there was like little records. There are these little sort of snippets of what was going on in my life, and I can see the transition myself. In compositions and how I'm approaching things and how I'm using pencils, and if I'm scratching at the canvas, they're a bit rawer and a bit more.
It feels like such a vital therapeutic tool. And it's one that's, in a lot of ways, I mean, if I think about even my world, there are now course after course combining deep psychotherapy and artistic expression. There's a reason why it's becoming so popular to access yourself in those ways that are nonverbal. There's so much science that looks at what the damage is that we can create when we really overly focus on a top line thought-based narrative rather than actually allowing some expression that's much more free. But I can feel, as you're talking, I can feel like the vividity of the pen on the page.
Absolutely, it was in a lot of ways, it was very, very consuming. When I was in it, I was kind of manic in these sort of outpourings in a lot of ways, but it's what it needed to be. It was probably the only space at the time that I felt like I could just be me, really, and pour something out that was not going to be filtered, was not going to be affected by, was not going to be adulterated in any way. My version of the world, how I saw it, whatever it may be. And it's not that every piece I created was, sometimes I'd sketch a set of keys or something. It's not carrying much, emotional weight in the composition, but actually just the process of doing, in the focus where you're surrounded by so much chaos, sometimes just bringing the mind to something that is just creative. And that in itself was just great escapism at the time.
I don't know if you know this, but one of my slight obsessions is looking at neurology and brain structures. I'm not going to bore you too much with this, but you'll know that there's this distinction that is made between the reptilian brain, the kind of early stress adaptive brain, and then prefrontal cortex, which is considered to be the rational mind. And most people don't know that your creative outlet is more in the prefrontal than it is in the amygdala. And the amygdala automatically activates when we're in a state of stress. So I'm picturing a child in a chaotic, and you were open about this during your talk, often relatively abusive household. And then the very natural inclination would have been to go into stress centers. And when we're in the stress centers, the way that the memory is formed is the more emotionally heightened an experience, the deeper that memory is lodged. And so you, in your form of escapism, go and find a piece of paper and you take a pencil, and immediately in doing that, you are very likely to have switched neurologically where you were operating from, which of course then does, from a cognitive perspective, really create its own therapeutic blanket. I'm marveling at the ingenuity of you, little you.
And it was just, it's funny, because as an adult, I can look back with that sort of mind and that understanding and see it. But as a child, it just naturally just occurred. I think some of it was because I was surrounded by other creatives. So I was fascinated by what they were doing and the why of it. And maybe it was questions that, had I not been around those people, I wouldn't have asked and maybe not pursued it in that way. But I saw it as an outlet of something. I didn't know what it was an outlet for them personally, what creativity meant. But for me, it certainly brought this therapeutic sort of element to it that is escapism in a lot of ways. And it grew over time, funnily enough. The more that, when I became aware that I was a kind of a victim of this trauma, there's a kind of almost a moment of crisis that kind of arrives when you realize, actually, I've been suffering all the, I didn't know that this is what was happening. You've just been living it. This is your day to day. And it kind of broke me down a bit, but actually all of a sudden the value of my creativity grew with it. The more that I struggled, the more that it had its place in my life. And it's been that way all the way through. All the moments of trauma and all the moments of significant troubles in my life, really, the hardest times, art has become, it's always at the forefront. It just makes its way to it, and it's because I practiced that thing.
I'm curious, Simon, have you ever had periods of time where you've really resisted going towards your canvas? Because I work with quite a lot of actors and writers, and They definitely go through peaks and troughs where it's like something inside of them is so not wanting to face either internal conflict or the pressure of expectation of creating another piece that they sink back down and often go into a form of kind of quasi isolation because they're not active in their practice artistically.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that I've in my sort of 20s, I fell out of love with painting and being creative. I wasn't sure. I think it was at a time when it was probably the first time when I really started to doubt that I had any real identity in it because I'd just done it. It was the first time I became aware that I'm not really an artist, right? And I'm not sort of, I started to wonder where it's leading me. I think I doubted the value in it maybe at a time. I think, and actually, funnily enough, it was a very difficult time for me. But all of a sudden, I started to see it maybe as something else. I thought that if I'm not going to be a professional artist, almost what's the point in pursuing it? What's the point in slaving away at a drawing for hours on end, or working on a pastel piece for weeks and stressing and worrying and kind of there's a whole roller coaster of emotions that I will go through when I'm creating something. But I kind of started thinking, oh, well, I don't know, this is not going to lead anywhere, right? I'm building a portfolio of work over time, over years and years and years, that I just sat there and I was kind of like, I don't know what I'm meant to be doing with any of it. I kind of wanted to just put it down and felt like I was carrying baggage in a lot of ways. I thought if I'm not going to be successful, and I'm not even going to try. I thought, what's the point in really pursuing this thing? But naturally, life led me back to it. And I hadn't really, maybe the longest gap was probably about 18 months or so of really not doing much. I might have sketched or done a bit of a doodle or whatever, but nothing of any real notable value to me. And then all of a sudden, I'm kind of back in it, and it might have been something else entirely. I started sort of messing around with wood and making bits of furniture, and of course, I hadn't seen it, but I found another creative outlet. Right, I was in another field, and I think maybe that's just what I needed to do at the time.
Give yourself a break from the intensity of the focus that you had had in this one particular medium.
And to change a piece of wood into a sculpture or a piece of furniture, and to take a slab, a raw block of something, and work with it was a different process. In that sense, it was something much more kind of just the weight, the using tools and machinery and all this stuff. It just, maybe I needed a new excitement at the time and something to just sort of break away from practice and process that I learned to know like the back of my hand, and then step into something else. But I found my way back to it anyway, because I realized I started sketching the things that I wanted to make. And before you know it, I'm kind of, yeah, I'm back there anyway.
I'm curious, for those that don't know much of your story from the perspective of the trajectory of your career, was there a singular moment where, I think this is the projection that we have, he gets discovered, or he suddenly arrives, and suddenly the acclaim is coming through the door. What was how would you describe that trajectory?
It was it's very mixed for me personally, because I'd sold a number of pieces when I was as just a practicing artist. I saw myself as a hobby artist. Over time, I was the kid in school selling caricatures of school friends, and I was the kid that set up in the school fetes. I'd have the drawing section, and I'd be selling my pieces, and we'd be 10p, 20p. And I remember getting told off at the end of school. I had to give like £5 worth of change back to all the kids that had bought my work, because kind of, I basically set up an enterprise. I was in primary school and I was getting in lots of trouble, but I suppose because I'd always done it in that way, I'd seen it as something that is sort of accessible to people, and I got commissioned by friends and family and the pencil drawings and bits and pieces, that I'd always saw it as something that you turn out to the world in a way, but never. These were sort of, it was very impressionistic work and stuff like that. It wasn't abstract. I didn't feel like it was directly relating to my personal experience in some ways. I didn't see it as that at the time when I was so young. But I think because I'd had that, when it came to actually turning professional, it didn't make sense to me. I don't know why. I'm going to probably struggle to make a living, and this is going to be the way. And yeah, and actually I had another business that I was running at the time, a furniture business. We were making bespoke handmade furniture, and kind of, it's all very sort of sculptural pieces, big chunky oak stuff. And I love the creative side of it. I started it just to make things, right? I didn't really start it. I had no business acumen at all. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just wanted to make stuff. And if I could monetize it to keep making stuff, I thought, perfect, I can just keep doing that. And it kind of became a business. And then the financial crash came and it wiped that out pretty much, kind of handmade furniture, bespoke pieces. The appetite for that just disappeared with the financial crash, but it forced me back. And I was kind of in limbo for a while, not really knowing, I don't know what I'm going to do here. I thought, I'm not going to be that guy anymore. We'd sunk a load of money into it and I'd expanded at just the wrong time. And the business, or with big expensive machinery and, extra loads of staff working for me. And it was kind of it was running a rate of knots that was kind of almost, outpacing my ability. And then it just crashed anyway. I wrestled with that for a good few years, but in that, all I had left was the fact that that's the way I saw it. My only skills was in being creative. The one thing I could be sure of is that I could be creative, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to just turn a few pieces out and start selling them on a few websites and just, see what I can do there. And the momentum, I had no idea that I'd stepped into abstraction and I'd started painting these pieces, and they were kind of abstracted skyscapes and seascapes, and there was a lot of energy in them. And I found my way to it because I loved doing it through experimentation. I had no idea that I was creating a look, a style that was going to land somewhere. And when it did, the momentum gathered so quickly that it took me probably 2 years or 3 years to accept that it had happened. Because I was just like, what the hell? It was like, I'm going to be in galleries, right? I was kind of like, what? Like, people want to see this work, and I was kind of like, but I didn't see the connect at all. I just struggled with that.
I love your story so much, Simon, because although we started the conversation saying that, imposter syndrome is rife and it's lovely and delicious and easing to stand behind the canvas without that personal connection, I am picturing the mother that's sitting listening to this at home, knowing that they have a kid and that they could today just give that kid a pad of paper and see what happens. I'm picturing all of the people that, as they listen to this episode, are allowed to consider themselves artists and creatives by virtue of the fact that you are describing to us exactly what it's like to go from a normie like me to an internationally acclaimed artiste like you. And it just collapses all of the projections and the hierarchy that we have about what it is to be famous, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, for me, I'm like the most average guy, right? I lived this life, and I just do this stuff, right? This just happens. I'm kind of like, I tell you, like, go out and do it, right? It's like, it's there, play around with it, just, and yeah, I think that's kind of the message that I try and give out there if I'm talking to, younger people hoping to step into artistic careers or just through their own joy. I'm like, just play around, just find your way to it. For me, it's a part of a life, like I said, that I've lived, but I've doubted it. I doubted it for so long. I found my way to it anyway. I didn't have to tread the path that I thought I needed to tread to find success.
Your capacity to deal with uncertainty, thank God you had your art to create during all of those periods of time where you didn't know exactly what was going to happen, because it is one of the least developed skills in modern culture, and it's the most critical. We live in a time where there could not be more noise, contradiction, different incoming sources of information that leave people incredibly confused and deeply overwhelmed. And yet nowhere in school or education do we really teach people how to be with uncertainty in that way, in their bodies, in their minds, in their hearts. I guess the phrase is we've gamified and strategized everything And I understand why it feels safer to live in that world, but it's so fragile. Something like COVID comes along and people are completely polaxed because they've got no capacity to be with their own fear or to live in a state where some of their liberties are curtailed. So I'm just gaining so much in listening to you, and I'm really quite amazed by your willingness and capacity to be with all of that unknown.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in the world that we live in today, I think that the desire is just to have everything kind of almost put in a box and kind of compartmentalize everything. That if you follow this route, this is going to lead to success, and if you do this, it's going to mean that. And I've genuinely fallen in and out of things. I've held on tightly to things I shouldn't have. I've fought for, in ways that I think are adding value and they're not. And the path doesn't have to be, for me anyway, there isn't a straight line to it. It has absolutely been a roller coaster. But I think in being creative, I think you almost need to accept that. You need to allow that to be, to practice at moments when you're vulnerable as well as when you feel confident, to step through a canvas when you don't feel like you can do it, and to wrestle with what that feels like. The wrestle in itself is kind of where the authenticity kind of lives. For me, I don't want it to feel like it's just been like some sort of polished thing just arrived. And because I stepped through 3 or 4 hoops, and I want to show that it's been complex. It's been a challenge. It's been a roller coaster of frustration and fury and passion and all of those things are genuinely what goes into my work. I tell anybody in an exhibition, I'm not just sat there, with a cup of tea and a paintbrush, gently doodling, going, "Oh, life's so fantastic." I'm exhausted and I'm manic sometimes, and I'm doubting. I'm like scratching away and almost clawing at the canvas, and we're in this sort of this. We're like traveling through life together, and it's a mirror of me, and it is absolutely that thing, And I don't want to create this fantasy that it's all perfect and wonderful.
You're making me think of my entrepreneurs. I went to a breakfast yesterday at Bingham River House, which is actually where we're going to be hosting some of the live podcast interviews this year, which is it's just the most gorgeous place. And I went to an entrepreneur's breakfast, and the guy that came to speak is an amazing chap called Zane, who's the co-founder of London Nootropics. And he was sharing his story, and he just seems like a Buddha, just sitting there, like smiling, really present, really humble. And the way that he described the story was this constant process of expect some challenge, find some solutions, expect some challenge, find some solutions. It was really clear from what he was saying that it wasn't that he didn't get emotionally activated by all of the peaks and troughs, but he knew that that was part of the deal. If you build a brand, or if you live a life, or if you're in a long-term romantic relationship, the deal is you show up to the fact that it is all of these things. And in a way, the suffering that we experience is much more created when we think that it should not be that way. When we have a projection that it's supposed to be easy or fluid, or we're meant to get it first time. That expectation is what then creates this collapse internally when you are confronted with the inevitable bumps, because you just don't have any of the resiliency to know that that's normal and that you'll find your way through.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's the biggest killer of kind of creativity is sort of working to an expectation of perfection. For me, some of the best moments in my painting process are actually when I'm wrestling the most with the work and struggling. I learn most about myself. I learn new techniques in those moments, in the uncertainty of it. I don't want to always be sure. The excitement comes in the uncertainty of it. The paintings that I feel the most connected to are the ones that I wrestle with the most. I've had some I could genuinely kneel in front of and cry when I get to the what I think of as the end of the process, because it's been such an intense sort of wrestle to surface the me in it and the relationship to the canvas, and just, oh yeah, God, it can be it can be a huge challenge. But it's fantastic as well. It just is. It becomes for me, I think about I'm pouring energy, and the more that I allow it to be, I don't want to sort of turn a tap on and off and filter it in a way and create this sort of false version of something. I'm genuinely, I want it to be raw. I want it to be powerful. I want it to be those things. But if it isn't at times, sometimes I'll just create a piece and it will happen very quickly. And it's quite peaceful and it just comes together quite well. And I have a great sense of direction and it just flows through me. But those pieces aren't the ones that really resonate with me. It's like, yeah, it's okay, it's nice, but I want to be, kind of scratching my head and standing there looking at it and yeah, I kind of want the music playing and I want it to be emotive and
Yeah, you want the grapple. You wanna be able to really
I
feel
want
it.
the challenge, yeah. It's almost so I imagine it being kind of, like an adventure seeker in a way. I want the adventure, I do. I don't want the easy path.
It must be so strange for you when you go to an exhibition, seeing all of these pieces of your heart, your soul, your body on a wall. I mean, these are huge, beautiful, immersive, textured pieces. They are so striking. As you speak, it makes so much sense that this is your process to get there because the texture for us, the depth for us is very obvious. But for you, it must be quite odd seeing your struggle externalized on a wall, side by side by side.
Yeah, and then framed, and then also the take on it too. Hearing individual people react completely differently to my journey. Knowing that a piece is leaving me that I may have struggled with for a couple of years on and off, and it's in and out of storage, and I want to burn this piece and destroy it, and it's challenged me in every way possible, and I've almost gone nuclear with it, and someone stood there looking at it, going, "It's so beautiful, and it's so what." Like, you've got no idea. You've got no idea what happened. Yeah, that piece yeah, but that it's also incredibly rewarding that it lives far beyond me. When the work is done, it's gonna go out and have a whole 'nother life, and it's gonna keep being interpreted by the individual. It's gonna have a new journey. It's gonna reflect. It's gonna be a mirror for someone else. And then the next viewer and I mean, I'm like, "Oh my god, what an incredible gift to be a part of that sharing of experience." And yeah, I'm like, "Wow." That for me, as a successful artist, that for me is the ultimate measure of where the value really sits.
It's so interesting, isn't it? This idea that I make something, then it goes from gallery to hands to gallery to hands to other hands. It's like we could look forwards in 200 years. We'd have absolutely no idea where this piece is going to be in the world.
No idea.
And that is stunning as a
Yeah.
legacy.
It could still be out there living, and in a way, and this is why I kind of come back to our own mortality. Yeah, we're all trying to find a way to kind of live beyond live beyond our years and to leave something. And again, I never thought about it in that way to be able to have a legacy that can potentially live on. But I'm like, what a wonderful thing art is, being creative, and it's going to live beyond memory. Maybe in a few generations there will be no more idea of who Simon Kenny really is, except for this work. This will be the record of me, in some way. I think, wow, how incredible. I didn't create it for that reason, but to know that it will live on in that way, I'm like, that's the potential of it, to leave something behind that will be considered. It's just incredible. Yeah.
Gosh, I'm so fired up in listening to you. I guess one of the questions that was coming up for me as you explore particularly the dense textural grapple, I wonder how much room this process leaves for your personal life, your love, your parenting.
Not
You,
much.
yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I'm divorced now for the past few years, and my work became, again, it's just what it always has been, a place for me to explore all of my trauma and all those things. But it's kind of, it's accelerated obviously with success and demand, and I'm 7 days a week in a studio and long hours, and obviously then there's correspondence and all these things too, and you kind of, there's just, yeah, it's a full-time commitment to craft. It genuinely is. Doesn't leave a lot of time. I'm desperate often to get out of the studio and give my mind a bit of breathing room. But when I leave, it's become such a language that I use that I feel muted when I'm outside of the studio. I'm like, I don't have my art. I'm like, I'm seeing all these amazing things. I might be sat at a restaurant and watching two people in a debate, and I'm like, oh, I would love to record this thing, or I'm watching a beautiful sunset, and I'm like, of course, I'm just back to, I want to go away and be creative again, and like all of my experience kind of gets sort of compressed down into something visual that I create, and of course, yeah, it doesn't matter where I am, it doesn't matter what I'm experiencing. Like every amazing moment that I experience, I'm like, oh, if I could be in there right now and just.
I really relate to that. I was reading the other day, and one of the passages in this particular book was talking about people like me that are in the sort of coaching or therapeutic world, and it basically said what you'll find over time is that the majority of people that you become friends with really should be your clients, and it wasn't saying it in an arrogant way. It was just saying that the way that your brain is formed, the particular way that you love to resonate with people, it means that they just kind of naturally fall into clients. It's not even conscious. And I really relate to it. I have practically had a lot of that, but also it just is it's a way of being for me, the same as you were describing.
It becomes our language, doesn't it? And it's kind of, that's the thing. Because if the way that we tell the story is of value to someone, in whatever means it may be, then that's what it is, right? It's kind of, yes, I stepped into art, professionally, to pay bills and to do those things, but actually the main driver for me outside of all of that is really just the love of being creative, and how that resonates with all of us, not just for me. There's now an extension that I wasn't maybe so much focused on, that I've become more and more aware of over time, that just having the ability to have a voice to share something with people, I think, is the connection, all of that stuff. It's so powerful for me to be stood in an exhibition and to, I know I felt incredibly emotional creating pieces, and to see people getting emotional, responding to it for their own journeys. That experience for me, I will leave an event on an absolute high, knowing that we don't know each other, right? We haven't, but we've met over this thing, and we've shared an experience that is kind of so enriching in a way, that the connection, I'll go from being an isolated artist in a studio, kind of rifling through my mind, trying to sort of deconstruct it all into something and make sense of it, to having this incredible connection with people. The shift is,
It's huge, because what you're doing is you're taking people away from their postured, overly identified characters, and you're bringing them into a real, raw experience of something. It's like a neutral terrain between the two of you that allows you both to bond. It's so much of what the world needs is for us not to be walking around in the identities that we think that we are, but being given so many moments where the kind of being of us gets to drop back and really witness and be involved in something totally mesmerizing and beautiful. It's gorgeous.
it's so powerful. It's allowing ourselves to be fragile, isn't it? In a world where we feel like we have to represent something all the time, or we have to achieve something all the time. Just allowing vulnerability is so powerful. I think to find a space where we can share that openly and authentically, I think art is brings that quality that I think it's missing in a world so polarized today. I think the need for connection between people, culture, humanity, I think art is the thing that we can come together on, discuss and debate, and react to and respond to. And I think,
It gives us permission. It gives us permission to express aspects of ourselves that, or to see on the stage or on the canvas aspects of ourselves that are so impolite.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Simon, it has been such an incredible treat to connect with you. Thank you for your time. Oh my goodness.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. It's been lovely.
What I'll do is for everyone that's with us, we'll make sure that all of you have access to where you can find out more about Simon's work, the exhibitions that are coming up, if you want to commission him, all of these things. Simon, is there anything I'm curious that you would like to leave our viewers and our listeners with that we haven't touched on? A message or something that feels really important for you in this moment in time?
I think I think we forget to play. I think we forget to let go of, we hold on to things so tightly, I think, in this day and age. I think we need to remember that it's okay to experiment and to fail and to fall down, and being vulnerable isn't a weakness. It's not. It's a really human experience, and sharing that vulnerability, I think, is invaluable. I think we shy away from that too often, I think. And if being creative can bring you some of that vulnerability and allow you a way to share it, I think actually, that's what I'd like to leave. Experiment and play around, and
All right, you guys, you've heard it in your personal lives, on your paper, in your businesses. Allow some space for play and allow some space for the insides of you maybe to emerge in a less polished fashion than you might think you needed. We will join you next week for another episode. And in the meantime, all that are here, please take gorgeous care of yourselves. I can't wait to connect with you guys soon.